In the 1990s, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Guatemala, and Honduras enacted school-based management (SBM) reforms that allowed communities to make key decisions about their schools that were previously reserved for state-appointed officials. Yet these reforms have recently begun to slide back. Using the cases of Honduras and Guatemala, two factors determine the extent to which an SBM reform is vulnerable to events that can bring about its termination, such as changes in government, union strength, and parental pressure. Prior to the 1990s, schools were funded and managed by the same entity, either the state and public schools or private providers in private schools. While each private school had autonomy to make decisions about its personal pedagogy, budget, and maintenance, in public schools such as decisions were made by government officials, mostly at the national level. Projeco in Honduras created pre-primary and primary schools, mainly in poor, remote, and/or rural areas, funded by the government but run by school councils composed of parents and community members. The school's SBM reform created in the 1990s typically relied on existing infrastructure such as homes and churches, and unpaid labor such as school council members. There were multiple grades, one teacher teaches several grades, and they offer teachers a lower pay and fewer benefits such as health insurance and pensions than traditional public schools. It was studied that two factors determined the likelihood of the reversal of the SBM reform. The first, the scope of the reform, which meant the number of schools it affects and the number of people it employs. And the second, the level of national investment in the reform, which meant the share of the reform's cost covered by the government and not by foreign aid. Using the cases of Honduras and Guatemala, it was contended that when both of these factors are high, the reform is most likely to be vulnerable to events that can bring about its reversal, such as the changes in government, union strength, or parental pressure that the literature discussed. Honduras and Guatemala are two particular useful cases to test the scope and funding hypothesis. While the reforms in these countries were nearly identical, the former survived and the latter did not. Over the past 2 decades, a global consensus was emerged about the need for countries to ensure all children are enrolled in school. The 1990 UNESCO sponsored World Conference on Education in Jamtang, Thailand, the 1998 Summit of the Americas in Santiago, Chile, and later the 2000 Millennium Summit in New York have called on developing nations to universalize access to primary and continue to expand pre-primary enrollments.
In order for the children of Honduras to attend school beyond their primary education, something needed to happen. Therefore, the Educadores program was formed.
The program was established to provide access to small villages and urban areas that are inhabited by the working poor. By coming to these communities, instead of the community having to travel to where the schools are located, they were hoping to decrease the high attrition rate of middle school students. The curriculum is based on grades 7 through 9 learning objectives defined by the Honduran government. In order for the students and facilitators to have access to learning the curriculum, a radio is provided for them to hear someone in the city teach a lesson. It is too expensive to have textbooks for every student and facilitator in the areas. A facilitator is used instead of a subject specialist teacher due to cost. The only requirement for a facilitator is that they have completed the grade level in which they are teaching and they are willing to travel. The lessons are designed to be highly motivational. They are able to create, even with the lack of resources, real-life problem solving and applications for students. A big idea for the program is how can the Honduras education system provide a connection to their personal community. Due to the lack of resources, the Honduras education has used the community's resources to make the lessons applicable. A few examples are farming and building necessities. The learning centers ended up closing. There were several factors that went into this. First, facilitators left due to not being paid enough to travel back and forth to the learning centers. The materials were scarce, and if there were materials, the facilitator had to pick them up wherever the materials were located. A promoter, also known as a boss, was to be used as a support for facilitators at each location. But unfortunately, the promoter never showed up to the locations. More factors were the facilitators did not understand the cassette tapes that taught the curriculum, therefore the content could not be taught in an effective manner. Facilitators needed to teach more and work on their explanations of the content being taught. And students dropped out because of childbirth or high childcare needs back at home. As you can see, the Honduras government rely heavily on the facilitators to make this program successful. However, according to Marshall Meja and Aguilar, the most serious concern is untrained facilitators that are attempting to fill a teaching gap caused by defective materials. Furthermore, Marshall Meja and Aguilar go on to state, this means facilitators, if they are not up to the task of teaching, the classroom environment is most likely to be minimum, and students tend to lose interest, and therefore the attrition rate rises.
On average, Honduras spends much more on education than other Latin American countries, and yet this has not resulted in superior educational outcomes. This is especially true in rural schools. According to the World Bank's Poverty Reduction Support Credit, the overly centralized management of the education system has led to poor accountability, high teacher absenteeism, and an inadequate teaching and learning process in the schools. One central claim to the article is the power of the Honduran Teachers Union that has not supported the growth of a strong system, as evidenced through high teacher absenteeism and low performance. Teachers are able to hold multiple positions within the school system, and this makes the profession very lucrative financially compared to other prospects in Honduras. Teacher absenteeism has also been a cause for alarm, with more than 40% of teachers missing a month or more of school in the year 2000. The teachers' union holds strong political power and has utilized strikes to make changes. Some propose that a decentralized model of education could improve education outcomes in Honduras. One organization advocating for this viewpoint is PROHECO. PROHECO stands for Proyecto Hondureño de Educación Comunitaria. Now, the idea is that by decentralizing the school system, power and control return to communities and schools instead of the larger institution that has proven not nearly effective enough, especially for schools in rural areas. According to the Education Ministry's website, communities qualify for PROHECO school if they meet the following criteria. 1, they are located in a rural area. 2, there are at least 25 preschool and primary school-aged children. 3, the nearest school is at least 3 kilometers away. And 4, the village is located in an area that was affected by Hurricane Mitch. PROHECO brings schools and education to areas that were underserved or not served at all. According to the article, by properly establishing these reforms with the transparency that comes with more public information, it will increase the checks and balances between citizens, communities, and policymakers for a higher quality education in Honduras. PROHECO provides the necessary supports to the schools while still allowing power to run the schools, including the hiring of teachers to reside within the local government or education system. PROHECO teachers teach more days than those in standard Ministry of Education schools, and educational outcomes are better than in standard schools, slightly so in Spanish, significantly so in math and science, despite the fact that PROHECO schools draw on a poorer population. It would seem from the results presented in this article that by decentralizing the education system in Honduras, increased accountability and outcomes can be achieved. Decentralization may be necessary, but Honduras should perhaps be hesitant to swing the pendulum too far away from respecting teachers' unions and lean into performance-based pay, as the article implies as a recommendation.
There are neglected areas of Honduras that are in need of access to education and growth in their system. There was hope that new systems could be put into place that were more efficient than traditional public schools. There was also an expectation of higher return for money invested, especially when student achievement in the region was far below desired levels. Community schools, as part of school-based management reforms, were brought about to promote more parental participation and a more effective utilization of local knowledge and capacity. These schools are run by councils called AECOs and are made up of 6 community members who work to obtain legal status. In doing this, they can open bank accounts, receive financial transfers, and perform functions on the government's behalf. Also, by engaging in more community participation, the schools are more responsive to the local needs. In shifting responsibilities to principals, teachers, and parents with varying degrees of decision-making power, these community schools in PROHECO have evidence of success over traditional public schools. Community councils have more local control, and one area they saw in need that was addressed earlier in the presentation is the need to raise teacher attendance. PROHECO teachers are paid by hours worked instead of having a contract, and their pay has the potential of being withheld, meaning teachers are more likely to not skip days, which plays into student success. These educators are eager to work in these schools, even though their pay is about 20% less a month. These teachers also have less experience and are usually newer, and roughly half have graduated from normal schools for teachers. The principal goal of the Parent Council may be to provide a functional school at a price the community can afford, and not necessarily the best school possible. Despite working in poorer environments with less formally trained and experienced personnel, there is evidence that Projeco schools are more efficient. Community councils and parents saw the importance in taking on more administrative duties, and the teachers report having more time in instructional activities, classroom prep, and grading homework. Students say that Projeco school environments are more positive and less fights are reported between peers. This study indicates that the school climate is significantly associated with achievement in Spanish. It also shows that small class sizes, although there are multiple grades and teachers are less qualified, are a significant predictor of achievement in science because these teachers have more time to dedicate towards prepping lessons and differentiation. The high parental involvement is also a positive advantage for Projeco students in mathematics. Projeco school directors also report significantly fewer school closings. These factors play into the continued development and evolving Projeco school reform.
Through all of the resources in our synthesis, we have found there's so many similarities and comparisons that we can conclude to. Honduras programs focus on how certain programs have been successful and others have not. We have also learned that government was very much involved and transitioned to parents being involved in the community and with the hiring process and decision making within the schools. Since 2008, Teacher Union was very much involved in this reform. Then by 2015, Teacher Union was not much involved in this reform at all, leaving two a very much effective in the secondary level, which caused a success from the CBM reform and progress in the content areas of math and science. Over all of the resources we have found, similarities have shown success over all of the CBM that we have seen through Honduras.